What's up? So, what does an organism get from its environment? This should be easy peasy. Most of the stuff you will have already seen at some point. So, an environment that it provides the things that a specific organism needs to live, grow, and reproduce is called its habitat. I really hope you have seen this word many, many times before. Hopefully back in elementary school, 4th, 5th grade. A habitat is where an organism lives. And it needs to fulfill all of the things an organism needs. It needs food, water, shelter. So it needs to be able to find or provide food. If I'm a berry-eating bear named Barry, then I need to have some berries around so Barry can eat. I need to be able to have a den so I can sleep, and possibly a fresh water source such as a stream, a creek, a waterfall, maybe a well, something like that. And then reproduce. So it can't be so cold that it freezes my babies to death, and it can't be so hot that my babies cannot survive either. So organisms live in different habitats because of their different needs. I can't take a polar bear out of Antarctica and put it here in Virginia. Although we have bears, I can't do that because it just doesn't have the adaptations. It has very sharp claws to grip onto the ice. Sure, that might be a little helpful. I don't think it's going to be necessary, though. They have bright white fur, as if that's not obvious. Obviously, it's not going to be good camouflage. So having bright white fur is actually going to be super harmful. That bear's totally going to get shot by one of you kids. You're going to go out there with your guns and shoot it and be like, look, I got a polar bear. Most likely that polar bear has extra blubber. Around here, sure, it gets cold, but it's still not as cold as Antarctica. So that polar bear might actually get too hot. It might actually kind of sweat. No good. So we talked about this before we even started this unit. So this next slide should be easy. An organism interacts with both the living and non-living parts of a habitat. So the biotic factors are parts of a habitat that are living. Here's where it gets tricky though. Or once living. A dead leaf is still biotic. My ferret, rest in peace Whiskers, that died when I was a little baby is still biotic because he was once living. When I mow my grass and then I have all that grass laying around because I don't rake it because I'm lazy, it is still biotic. You buy your girlfriend or boyfriend flowers for Valentine's Day. Everyone loves the no-no part. Guess what? Even though they're slowly dying, they are still biotic. So plants, seeds, berries, ferrets, eagles, bacteria, this aloe plant specifically. Every part of nature that is living or once living. So the trees, the grass, all that stuff. All biotic. On the contrary, or on the opposite side of this, is abiotic or non-living parts. Remember that prefix a always means not or non. Asexual is not sexual. Abiotic is not living or non-living. So that's going to include the sunlight, the soil, the temperature, the oxygen, the water. None of that stuff is living or once was ever living. The sun, not alive. Soil, it's just a bunch of really tiny rocks and dirt. Temperature, obviously not alive. It's not even tangible. I can't even touch hot. Nope. Oxygen, not alive. Water, not living. So abiotic is not living parts. So that's that, but we are jumping into population interactions because it's super easy. So ecologists are going to study the biotic and abiotic parts together. Remember, I keep talking about how in this ecology unit, right here, in this ecology unit, we are seeing how do things work together? How does one thing affect another? So populations can change in size when new members join that population or when members leave that population. Hold on, I went too fast. Hold on. So think of this classroom. Your class size has changed even from the beginning of the school year. Most of my classes, you got a new kid, or maybe many new kids. Period 5, you got all kinds of new kids in there. Okay, so they made your population size bigger. But then we have some kids that move. They go to different teachers, or they get their schedule changed around. Like we have a student that was in my period 2-3 class, and now she's in my period 5 class. So my period 2-3 class, their class got smaller, whereas my period 5 class, your class got bigger. So populations change all the time. And of course, we're going to have big fancy scientific names to title them. So the most common way is for organisms to be born into it. If an organism's born, if more organisms are born than die, it's going to grow. So think of a hospital. Mostly 2 things are happening at a hospital. Babies are being born and people are on the verge of dying and they need help. Okay? So if more babies are born, let's say there's 100 people in the hospital and there are 8 babies born. So 8 of those people were mommies. Congratulations. Our population just went to 108. But sadly, 3 people died at the same time. So we take 108 minus 3, that puts us at 105, but our population still grew by 5. We have a positive 5 birth rate. So that's the number of births per 1,000 per time period. So in our example, we only used 100. It's a little bit easier to work with, okay? But our birth rate was 8. We had 8 new babies. And can you predict what our death rate was? 3. Okay? So in our little example here, our birth rate was higher than our death rate, so our population grew. We had a larger population than what we started with. So same thing here. The most common way for individuals to leave a population is by dying. The death rate is the number of deaths per 1,000 per time period. My goodness, I keep jumping ahead. So let's go back to the hospital. We have 1,000 people. It's now a different day, different week, different month, whatever. 1,000 people. Well, there is still 8 mommies. Okay? 8 mommies, so now we're up to 108. However, the flu is hitting all the old people really hard because old people have a weak immune system, so they get sick super easy. So now we have 12 old people die. So 108 minus 12 would put us down at 96. So we actually had a negative birth rate. We actually lost people in our population. More people died than were born in this particular situation. If birth rate and death rate are relatively the same, the population is probably going to stay the same. So on any given day, this is about true of humans. There's about the same number of babies that are born than old people that die. About the same, okay? And sadly, sometimes young people die. Car accidents, freak accidents, you know how it is. Tornadoes, that kind of stuff takes out people. So most of the time, though, the human population in the United States is about 300 million. That's a lot. It's a lot of people. Muchos peoples. So this is what I already said. If there are more people dying than being born, the population is going to go down. Whereas if more people are being born than are dying, our population is going to go up. So when you get a question about this, just take a second and think back. If I had 10 people die and only 3 people get born, that puts me at -7. My population went down. If I had 10 people born, but only 3 people die, that puts me at +7. So that puts me at my population going up. Just take your time and think through this. This really isn't that difficult. Okay, the hardest part's positive and negative. So there's actually another way that population size can change. It's when animals move in or out of a population. So immigration is moving in, emigration is moving out. It's easy. Immigration starts with an I, so does in, right here. Emigration starts with an E. Exit starts with an E. Pretend that word says out/exit. Okay? Immigration, in, emigration, exit. So our country is pretty big on immigrants. So we let a lot of immigrants come into our country. Most of us, us are immigrants. So the United States is a pretty good example for immigration. Our population goes up because of immigrants. However, we have a lot of people that want to emigrate or leave the country because they want to go travel, or maybe they want to go live across the lake, as my grandma calls it. I have a buddy in college. He teaches, goodness, I think he teaches in Sweden. That's awesome. You get to travel and teach in Sweden. So emigration is a real thing as well. So think of it this way. If you want to move to Egypt, you are emigrating out of the United States, and you are immigrating into Egypt. When you move somewhere, you are both an emigrant and an immigrant. When I left Pennsylvania, I emigrated out of Pennsylvania and I immigrated into Virginia. Okay? So that's a good way to remember that. Immigration in, emigration out. So animals may move in or out when food is scarce. So obviously, when there's no longer food, you can't just stay there and be like, oh, I really hope that food will just magically reappear. That's not how it works. You gotta go find food. So maybe these ducks or geese here, they ate up all the bugs that they like to eat. So they had to go move and find somewhere else to eat. I know the cows on my farm, when they eat all the grass on the left side of my house, they move over to the right side, and then they let the grass go back. And then they move back over to the other side. So when they leave, the herd is no longer part of that population. So these, I'm just going to guess, these 12 birds here, maybe 13, I don't know. They are no longer in that population. They have now moved somewhere else. So graphing changes. We've already graphed some line graphs about population. You did this with Miss Sewell while I was out 2 weeks ago. So changes in populations, can be displayed in a line graph. Remember, we use a line graph here because it shows change over time. Okay, so we're showing x-axis is going to be the independent, that's the time. I, as the scientist, can control how long I study. Maybe I'm only going to study for 10 seconds. Maybe I'm going to study it for 3 minutes. Maybe I'm going to study it for 30 years. I can control how long I study. What I cannot control is how big the population is. I can't go out and say, no, Mr. Bird, you can't live here. No. Okay? I cannot control the population size. That depends on other factors. So here's a nice bright, goodness gracious, a nice bright line graph. Here's our, oh goodness, down here is our year. Up here on the side is world population in billions. So this is actually a predictive line graph. So you can see back in the 1800s, or back in 1800 exactly, we had 1 billion people on Earth. Here's where we are today. We are almost in 2020, believe it or not. So according to this graph, we are at, follow my cursor, 7.5 billion people. But notice that this graph goes all the way up to 2100, okay? So it is predicting that we are going to end up here at 9 billion people. And I'm going to let your brain kind of think, and maybe you can come up to me and talk if you want, and maybe next week's lesson is going to help out with this. Notice that this is going up and 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 up. And then it reaches the top point right here. What's it starting to do here? And why do you think it's starting to do this? And this is just a prediction. This totally might be wrong, so don't freak out. This is just a prediction. It's called future timeline. So in the year 2100, they're predicting that our population is going to start going back down. So I'm curious, if you want, you don't have to. You don't get a treat for it or anything. Tell me what you think. So you are finished the notes. Key things from today are biotic is living, abiotic is non-living, and populations change based on births, deaths, immigrations, and emigrations. Nothing too difficult there. If you need any help, please see one of the teachers in the classroom. Any of us can help you. If you need any help, blah, blah, blah. Okay, go back to Google Classroom or look on the front whiteboard to figure out where you need to go next.